She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She simply stopped in the middle of the gala, holding her crystal champagne glass with a calmness that stood in chilling contrast to the devastating intensity of her gaze. I was there with someone else. Another woman's hand wrapped around my arm, laughter echoing around us. But the instant her eyes locked onto mine, the world fell silent. It wasn't jealousy I saw in those dark eyes. It was something far more dangerous. Absolute certainty. A quiet, unshakable sense of possession. She didn't have to say a single word. Yet her message cut through the crowd like a command I could physically feel. You may be with her, but you still belong to me. The shock didn't come from betrayal. It came from the terrifying realization that she was right. And in that moment, I knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. I know you can feel it. That desire for the story not to end, just when the tension reaches its peak. I feel it too, but I have to follow the platform's guidelines to protect this channel. That's why I created a special place, a private sanctuary for those who truly appreciate the beauty of every detail and the depth of raw emotion. It's my exclusive story collection. There, creative freedom has no limits. There are no abrupt cuts or moments left unfinished. It's a space where the tension between the characters has room to breathe, where silence speaks louder than words, and every glance is explored with the intensity it deserves. It's a deeper journey into the characters' psychology, the emotions hidden between the lines, and everything we can only hint at here on YouTube. When you get access to this collection, you're not just unlocking exclusive, immersive stories. You're becoming the reason this channel continues to exist. Your support allows me to keep creating these stories with the care, passion, and authenticity they deserve. I want every story to feel personal, emotional, and unforgettable. If you're ready to cross that line and experience the full depth of these narratives with me, you'll find the link in the first pinned comment. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. The air conditioning in the event lounge on the 40th floor seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the humid New York heat rising through the city that Tuesday night. Daisy adjusted the strap of her silk dress for the third time, the smooth fabric gliding against her skin like a temptation she couldn't ignore. She held a delicate crystal glass in one hand, the ice already melted, watering down the whiskey she never really wanted in the first place. Beside her, Amy laughed at something she hadn't even heard. Daisy simply nodded, an automatic gesture, while her eyes swept across the crowded ballroom, barely acknowledging her companion. She wasn't looking for anyone in particular, or perhaps she was, but admitting that truth felt like carrying a weight in the pit of her stomach. You're distracted, Daisy. Is the expansion project still stuck in your head even tonight? Amy's voice sounded distant, as though it were coming from behind a sheet of glass. It's not the project, Amy. It's just the noise. Too many people. Daisy lied. The lie came effortlessly, another shield she had learned to wear like a second skin. She forced a smile that never reached her eyes and pretended to pay attention to the conversation in front of her, though her peripheral vision remained fixed on the entrance. Then somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chatter around her never changed, but Daisy's focus did. Charlotte had just walked in. The company's CEO, the woman Daisy had spent weeks avoiding in the office hallways, had arrived. Charlotte wore a flawlessly tailored dark suit that seemed to absorb every ray of light around her. She wasn't scanning the room for familiar faces. She was looking directly at Daisy. Daisy's heart lurched so violently she felt the beat rise into her throat. She watched Charlotte's eyes settle on her. There was no surprise in the older woman's expression, only a slow, deliberate assessment. Her gaze traveled from Daisy's face to her neck, then lower, finally stopping on Daisy's hand, resting innocently on Amy's arm. Charlotte's stare wasn't merely one of professional authority. It carried something heavier, something that spoke of secrets shared behind closed office doors, and lingering glances exchanged across conference tables. "Excuse me, Amy. I need another drink," Daisy murmured, her voice rougher than she intended. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked toward the bar, painfully aware of Charlotte's eyes on her back. It felt like a physical pressure, forcing her shoulders straighter, her steps a little faster. The bar was crowded. Daisy ordered sparkling water, anything to keep her hands occupied. She caught the scent of Charlotte's perfume, sandalwood blended with something citrusy and dangerously sharp, before she even saw her standing beside her. She didn't need to turn her head. The air between them became charged, dense, difficult to breathe. "The party is Interesting, isn't it? Charlotte's voice was low, controlled, her rich American accent carrying a faint, husky warmth. She wasn't looking at Daisy. She was staring at the marble countertop. It is. I didn't know you were coming. I wasn't planning to. Charlotte slowly swirled the wine inside her glass, the dark liquid moving in perfect rhythm with the elegant motion of her fingers. But I had a feeling I should stop by and see how things were going. Only then did she turn toward Daisy. Her eyes, a shade too complex to name, locked onto Daisy's with an intensity that stripped away every defense she had left. I see you're in good company. Daisy suddenly felt desperate to explain. To tell her Amy was just a coworker, that he meant nothing, that she was simply trying to move on. But the words died before they ever reached her lips. She only bit her lower lip, a nervous habit, and instantly noticed Charlotte's dark eyes following the gesture. He's just someone I know. Her voice barely rose above the music. Nothing more. Interesting. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Charlotte's mouth, so subtle it almost didn't exist. You've never been very good at hiding things, Daisy. Your eyes betray every ounce of your nervousness. Charlotte stepped closer. Far too close. Close enough that anyone else would have considered it completely inappropriate. The proximity became almost tangible. Daisy could make out every detail of Charlotte's skin, the slow pulse beating beneath her neck. She wanted to step away. She wanted to run, but her feet refused to move, just as they never had whenever Charlotte came near. You should have told me you were bringing him, Charlotte whispered, low enough for only Daisy to hear. That changes the rules of the game, and you know how much I hate losing control over what's mine. A shiver raced down Daisy's spine. The words "what's mine" weren't spoken loudly. They didn't need to be. Their weight said everything. Charlotte knew. She knew about the hesitation, the sleepless nights, the failed attempts to stay away. She didn't need to touch Daisy to make her feel completely held captive. I'm not yours, Charlotte. I never was. Daisy spoke the words, but even she could hear how little conviction they carried. Charlotte laughed, a quiet, humorless sound, filled with enough restrained tension to send warmth rushing through Daisy's veins. She leaned in slightly, her hand lifted only a few inches, almost brushing Daisy's arm, before stopping in midair, a restrained gesture, powerful precisely because it never became a touch. You don't have to say it out loud. Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. We both know the truth is far less convenient for you. Then she stepped away, leaving Daisy frozen beside the bar, still holding her untouched glass of sparkling water, her heart battered against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate to escape. She watched Charlotte disappear back into the center of the ballroom without looking back even once. Daisy remained exactly where she was, unable to move, still feeling the burn of Charlotte's gaze lingering against her skin. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. No escape would ever be simple enough. The game had just changed, and somehow, she was already losing before it had truly begun. Have you ever felt that way? As if no matter how hard you tried to walk away from someone, a single glance from them could pull you right back to the center of everything? Sometimes love isn't a choice. Sometimes it's a quiet surrender. If you've ever lived through that impossible tension, wanting to leave while secretly wishing the other person would stop you, subscribe to the channel and follow this story to discover what happens next. I walked back to Amy as though I were walking toward an execution. The glass of sparkling water in my hand, which should have served as a shield, now felt like proof of my own fragility. Amy greeted me with that bright, genuine smile, the kind that used to calm me after terrible days. But tonight, it only highlighted how absent I was, how my mind was still trapped at that bar, drifting through the scent of sandalwood and the unbearable confidence of Charlotte. You were gone for a while, Amy said softly. There wasn't a trace of accusation in her voice, which somehow made me feel even worse. She absent-mindedly adjusted the neckline of her dress, a small unconscious gesture from someone trying to find comfort in her own body while sensing my uneasiness. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just the air conditioning, I lied, my voice coming out a little louder than I intended. It's freezing in here, don't you think? Amy gently touched my arm. Her skin was warm, a cruel contradiction to the icy sensation running down the back of my neck. Her touch should have reminded me that I was here, living a perfectly normal life. Instead, it made me ache with a violent longing for it to be Charlotte's hand resting there. Charlotte, with her slender, cool fingers that never seemed to ask permission before touching me. The ballroom seemed to pulse around us. The soft jazz drifting through the speakers had become nothing more than white noise, drowned out by the ringing inside my ears. I glanced toward the dance floor, then toward the towering windows overlooking New York's glittering skyline, and inevitably, my eyes betrayed me. I searched for her. Charlotte stood only a few yards away, speaking with one of the company's partners. She didn't require much space. She owned every room she entered. Her posture was a lesson in perfection. Straight spine, chin lifted just enough, the gaze of a predator carefully concealed behind flawless corporate courtesy. As the partner spoke, Charlotte nodded politely, but her eyes weren't listening. They wandered slowly across the room until, like a compass finding true north, they landed on me. She didn't look away. She didn't blink. Instead, she slowly raised her champagne glass, a gesture so subtle it almost disappeared, as though she were making a toast to something only she understood. Panic climbed into my throat. "Who is she looking at?" Amy asked, turning slightly. My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" "The CEO, Charlotte. She's been staring over here for almost 30 seconds. Do you think she wants to talk to us about the branch office contract?" I don't know. I don't think so." My voice was barely more than a breath. Before Amy could ask another question, Charlotte started walking toward us. She wasn't in a hurry. She walked like someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. The sharp rhythm of her heels against the marble echoed like a countdown to my downfall. I felt my knee tremble beneath my dress. Completely unaware of the storm approaching, Amy straightened her posture, adjusted her hair, and wore the bright expression of someone excited to meet the company's CEO. It made me want to cry. Charlotte stopped only inches away. Her perfume, that unmistakable sandalwood with its sharp citrus edge, filled my senses, effortlessly overpowering Amy's delicate floral fragrance. She didn't look at me. She looked directly at Amy. "Good evening." Charlotte's voice was velvet wrapped around steel. "I hope you're enjoying the reception." "It's wonderful, Ms. Charlotte," Amy replied enthusiastically. "I'm Amy. Daisy has spoken very highly of your leadership." I froze. My fingers tightened around my glass until I thought the crystal might crack. Charlotte allowed the silence to linger 1 second longer than good manners permitted. Then she slowly turned toward me. Her smile was a flawless trap. Daisy." She stretched out my name, letting the final sound linger in the air like either a caress or a threat. "She's an exceptionally dedicated employee. When Daisy commits herself to something, she always sees it through. Isn't that right, Daisy?" The double meaning hit me like a punch to the stomach. Cold sweat gathered at my temples. She wasn't talking about work. She was talking about the nights we'd spent locked inside the executive office, about everything that happened once the doors closed and professionalism dissolved into skin and breathless silence. I just tried to do my best. I fought to keep my voice steady. Charlotte stepped slightly to the side, shrinking the distance between us even further. Amy disappeared from her attention entirely, as though she were nothing more than another piece of furniture. Charlotte leaned closer. Her lips hovered just beside my ear. The warmth radiating from her body was unbearable. "Your best is fascinating, Daisy." Her whisper barely stirred the air. "But sometimes, you seem to forget that loyalty comes with a price." Her voice was so quiet that, had Amy been paying just a little more attention, she might have heard it. Yet the intention behind every word thundered inside my mind. Charlotte stepped back again, her flawless posture instantly restored. Amy, still smiling, seemed completely oblivious to the electrical current that had just torn through my nervous system. Then Charlotte casually brushed her fingertips across Amy's shoulder, an almost accidental gesture. A mark of territory so subtle that only someone who truly knew Charlotte's possessive nature could recognize it for what it was. "Enjoy the party. The night is only getting started." Then she looked directly into my eyes. Dark, unreadable. "And Daisy," she paused, "try not to get too distracted. The world becomes a very small place when you're trying to hide secrets." She turned and walked away, leaving tension and confusion hanging in the air behind her. Amy let out a quiet breath. "Wow. She's intense, isn't she? Just talking to her gives you butterflies." I couldn't answer. I was too busy trying to control my breathing, dragging heavy, uneven breaths into my lungs. My eyes drifted to Amy's shoulder, to the exact place where Charlotte's fingers had touched her. It was as though an invisible brand had been burned into her skin, and with growing horror, I realized the game wasn't over. It was escalating, and the worst part, I didn't want it to end. Then my phone vibrated inside the hidden pocket of my dress. A short vibration. One message. I knew exactly who it was before I even looked. Fear and desire blended together inside me. A toxic cocktail I couldn't stop drinking. I should have turned my phone off. I should have taken Amy by the hand and walked away. Instead, I unlocked the screen. The message contained only 2 words. 2 words powerful enough to shatter every illusion of normalcy I was still desperately trying to preserve. Look behind you. I froze. The ballroom seemed to spin around me. Outside, New York's lights blurred into streaks of neon. I knew that if I turned around, there would be no going back. The bridge had already been burned. Have you ever experienced a moment like that? That single fraction of a second, when you know that whatever choice you make next will change your life forever, and yet your body moves on its own, ignoring everything your mind is screaming? If you can feel the weight of this tension, then you already know. The worst, or perhaps the best, is still waiting to come. Subscribe to the channel to discover what Charlotte wrote next. The glow of Daisy's phone screen reflected across her face, a cold light that seemed ready to expose her secret to everyone in the ballroom. Look behind you. It wasn't merely an invitation. It was a summons. She felt the weight of Amy's gaze resting on her, a silent expectation she couldn't bring herself to meet, and somehow that hurt more than any direct confrontation ever could. Daisy slipped the phone back into her dress, her fingers still cold, and let out a breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. Amy, I think I need a little fresh air. The noise is starting to get to me. Her voice came out tighter than she'd intended. Amy smiled, that same patient, understanding smile that, at that moment, felt like punishment for the guilt building inside Daisy's chest. Of course. You look a little pale. Do you want me to come with you? No, it's okay. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I promise. Daisy barely waited for an answer. She turned and hurried toward the side door leading to the private terrace. Her steps were quick, almost reckless, the long silk dress whispering across the polished marble floor with every stride. Every inch that separated her from Amy felt like betrayal, yet the magnetic force pulling her in the opposite direction was something she couldn't resist. As she stepped outside, New York's humid night air, carrying the scent of asphalt after a warm evening, hit her like a sudden shock. The terrace was nearly empty. Only the soft glow spilling through the ballroom windows and the distant lights of the city's skyscrapers illuminated the space. Charlotte was already there. She leaned against the stone railing, her arms folded over her tailored suit, silently watching the skyline. She didn't turn when the terrace door opened. She didn't have to. She knew exactly who had arrived. The silence between them was thick, almost tangible, broken only by the distant hum of the city and Daisy's uneven breathing. You came. Charlotte's voice was calm, low, never looking away from the skyline. The tranquility in her tone stood in perfect contrast to the chaos raging inside Daisy. I shouldn't have. Daisy stopped several feet away, deliberately leaving as much distance between them as she could. Charlotte slowly turned. The lazy confidence of the movement belonged to someone who had no reason to rush. Time, after all, was on her side. She stepped forward. Instinctively, Daisy stepped backward until her spine met the cold concrete wall behind her. There was nowhere else to go, unless she walked straight through Charlotte. Charlotte smiled, barely. The expression never reached her eyes. Those dark, analytical eyes quietly devoured every ounce of Daisy's hesitation. You keep saying you shouldn't be here, and yet, your feet brought you to me. Charlotte closed the distance between them. The scent of sandalwood became overwhelming, filling Daisy's lungs with every breath. What are you doing with her, Daisy? The question landed like a stone between them. Heat rushed into Daisy's cheeks. Amy, she's just a friend. You know how corporate life is. There's always someone who wants to. Don't give me rehearsed speeches. Charlotte interrupted her. She lifted one arm and rested her hand against the wall beside Daisy's head. Without touching her, she had trapped her. The outstretched arm silently blocked every possible escape. You know she's not just a friend. Charlotte's voice remained impossibly calm. You're using her. But why? To prove what? That you can have a normal life? That you can be like everyone else? Tears burned at the corners of Daisy's eyes. Not from sadness, from frustration. From a deep anger she had no idea how to release. She lowered her gaze, fixing it on one of the buttons of Charlotte's suit jacket. She couldn't bear to meet those eyes that always seemed capable of reading every hidden thought she tried so desperately to bury. "I just want peace, Charlotte. I want out of this game. You suffocate me. Everything you touch, it always has to belong to you. It always has to be under your control." Her voice cracked. Desperation leaked through every word. Charlotte tilted her head, studying her. She moved even closer, close enough for Daisy to feel the warmth radiating from her body. A living wall of energy that made it difficult to think. Charlotte slowly lifted her hand. One finger gently brushed beneath Daisy's chin, encouraging her to raise her face. The touch was impossibly light, almost accidental, yet it sent a jolt of electricity racing down Daisy's spine. Her knee trembled. "If I suffocate you," Charlotte whispered, "then why are you still here? You could have left with her. You could have invented any excuse and walked out of this party, but you didn't. You came to me, because I'm weak." The confession escaped Daisy's lips like a painful sigh. Charlotte slowly shook her head. "No, Daisy, you're not weak. You're simply too honest for your own good. And that's why you're mine." The word mine didn't sound crude. It wasn't vulgar possession. It sounded like recognition, an acknowledgement of a connection neither of them wanted to admit, yet neither of them could deny. The tension between them reached its breaking point. Silence itself became deafening. Daisy had the strange sensation that if anyone stepped onto the terrace at that exact moment, they would actually see invisible sparks dancing between them. Charlotte never broke eye contact. Her thumb now traced the faintest invisible line along Daisy's jaw. The gesture lasted only a heartbeat longer than society would ever consider acceptable. Daisy stopped breathing. She stood suspended between two worlds, the safety of the ordinary life she desperately wanted, and the electrifying danger of something she could no longer pretend didn't exist. The music from the ballroom had disappeared. Only the violent rhythm of her own heartbeat remained, crashing against her ribs. Then Charlotte slowly withdrew her hand. An unexpected emptiness instantly replaced the warmth of her touch. She turned back toward the city, as though the conversation had already ended. Yet everything about the terrace had changed. "Go back to her," Charlotte spoke without turning around. "But before you do, take a good look at what you're doing, and then ask yourself, how much longer can you keep living this lie?" Daisy remained frozen for several long seconds. Her entire body still vibrated from Charlotte's closeness, from the echo of every word she'd spoken. She knew she should leave. She should run back to Amy, back to the safe life she had worked so hard to build. But as she took her first step toward the terrace door, she stopped. She turned one last time. Charlotte stood alone against the glowing skyline of Manhattan, a solitary silhouette surrounded by endless city lights. A painful realization tightened around Daisy's chest. Nothing would ever be the same after tonight. This game was no longer about winning or losing. It was about the truth she had been hiding from herself all along. And as she looked at Charlotte, she finally understood that perhaps the only person she had ever truly been deceiving was herself. Morning light in New York had always felt unforgiving, but that Wednesday it seemed deliberately cruel. Daisy stared at her monitor, the blinking cursor pulsing with relentless precision, like a countdown to something she couldn't yet name. The office was quiet, that strange, heavy silence that always comes before a storm. Only the distant hum of the servers and the muffled conversations drifting through the hallway disturbed the stillness. She tried to focus, but the empty spaces between the words on her spreadsheet kept expanding, filling with memories from the night before, the cold air on the terrace, the scent of sandalwood, the feeling of the icy wall pressed against her back. "You've been like this since you got here. What happened?" Amy leaned against the doorway, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She looked so steady, so safe. The oversized wool sweater, her casually tied-back hair, the concerned expression she directed toward Daisy. She was exactly the kind of person who should have brought peace. Instead, she brought a crushing guilt so heavy Daisy could barely remain sitting upright. "It's the project, Amy. Charlotte wants everything finished yesterday." The lie came automatically now. She didn't even have to think before building another wall between herself and the truth. "I'm just a little tired." Amy walked over and stopped beside her. Daisy caught the soft scent of lavender lingering around her. It couldn't have been more different from Charlotte's presence. The contrast struck her chest so sharply it felt as though something inside her was about to snap. You don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders. If you need help with the analytical section, I can— No. The interruption came far too quickly. I've got it. Please. I just need a little space to organize my thoughts. Amy stepped back. For the briefest moment, disappointment flickered across her face before it disappeared beneath her usual gentle understanding. Okay. I'm having lunch with the marketing team. I'll see you later. Daisy simply nodded. She couldn't even find the strength to smile. When the door closed behind Amy, she released the breath she'd been holding. Her exhaustion wasn't physical. It lived somewhere much deeper. It was the exhaustion of splitting herself into two separate lives. Two carefully sealed compartments threatening to collapse into one another at any moment. The sharp sound of high heels echoing down the hallway shattered her thoughts. They weren't ordinary footsteps. They were measured, confident, purposeful. The kind of footsteps that announced a person's arrival long before they appeared. Daisy felt her heart climb into her throat. She turned back toward her computer, pretending to work. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. Charlotte entered without knocking. Her perfectly tailored gray suit looked like armor. Her expression belonged to someone who had already read every thought running through Daisy's mind. She walked to the desk and stopped, motionless. The silence she carried with her seemed to drain every ounce of oxygen from the room. The report. Charlotte's voice was calm, simple. She didn't look at the computer. She looked directly at Daisy, focused, penetrating, inescapable. I'm finishing it. You'll have it in 30 minutes. Charlotte didn't move. Instead, she leaned forward, placing both hands on the glass desk. The closeness felt like a silent assault. Daisy could feel the warmth radiating from her. She could make out every tiny detail of her skin. You look exhausted, Daisy. Charlotte's tone remained perfectly professional. Is your personal life affecting your ability to focus? The words sounded harmless, but beneath them lived a venom only the two of them could recognize. My personal life is none of your business, Charlotte. Daisy's voice trembled despite her effort to remain composed. Charlotte laughed, a dry, humorless sound that never reached her eyes. She leaned even closer. The familiar scent of sandalwood wrapped around Daisy like a web. Everything that happens inside these walls, and everything that affects what happens inside these walls, is, by definition, my business. She paused. Especially when it involves choices that distort your reality. What do you want from me? Daisy whispered. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Do you want me to quit? Do you want me to leave? What else do you want to take from me? Charlotte slowly extended her hand. She didn't touch Daisy. Instead, her fingertips traced the rim of Daisy's coffee mug. A slow, possessive, deliberate gesture. I don't want you to leave. I want you to stop pretending. She held Daisy's gaze. Do you really think Amy knows you? Do you really believe this polished little life you've built can survive the weight of what's actually happening here? Her eyes briefly drifted to Daisy's lips, before returning to her eyes. You're living a lie. And the most dangerous kind of lie is the one we tell ourselves just so we don't have to face the truth. Tears slipped down Daisy's cheeks. Hot, silent, completely beyond her control. The weight of Charlotte's words was unbearable. She stood in the middle of her own office, her safe place. Yet it felt as though the floor beneath her feet had begun to split apart. For the first time, she realized Charlotte was right. Not about work, not about the company, about something far more fundamental. She was breaking herself in two. Sometimes love isn't about what we want. Charlotte's voice softened unexpectedly, almost sounding like regret. It's about what we can't escape. You can hide behind safety. You can hide behind doing the right thing. You can hide behind Amy. But at the end of every day, I'm still the voice you hear when you try to fall asleep. Daisy's phone vibrated on the desk. A text message from Amy. I'm in the cafeteria, waiting for you. The screen glowed softly, a tangible reminder that she still had a place, a role, a life. And yet Charlotte remained standing there, like a force of nature that never asked permission, only demanded to be felt. Daisy looked at the phone, then back at Charlotte. She wasn't angry anymore, only exhausted, so deeply tired of running. She met Charlotte's eyes. For the first time, there was no defense left, only the painful realization that she no longer knew who she was whenever she was away from her. You're destroying everything. Daisy's whisper was barely audible. Charlotte slowly straightened, Her gaze remained steady, fearless, without regret. "No, I'm only revealing what was already falling apart. The difference is, now you can't pretend you don't see it anymore." Charlotte turned and walked out of the office with the same quiet precision she'd entered. Daisy remained there, alone. The silence felt heavier than before. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were simply cold, numb, and with terrifying clarity, she understood that the breaking point hadn't been an argument or some dramatic confession. It had been this moment, this silence, the moment when the truth stood completely exposed between them, with nowhere left to hide. Have you ever loved someone knowing that even if everything worked out, you'd never find the peace you were searching for? Sometimes we stay in relationships because we're afraid of the emptiness, not because we're fulfilled by love. If you've ever felt like you're simply waiting for the mask to fall, and you're terrified of what you'll find underneath, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey. Because sometimes, the greatest love story we'll ever live is the one we simply can't, or perhaps don't want to, end. The air inside the office that afternoon seemed to have forgotten how to move. The sealed windows, the constant hum of the servers, the lingering scent of paper and cold coffee. It all felt as though it were pressing against Daisy's lungs. She couldn't focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The blinking cursor pulsed with cold precision, like an artificial heartbeat, while her mind stubbornly replayed the events of that morning. Charlotte hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene. She had been surgical, and the worst part, she had been right. The silence that followed between them throughout the day hadn't been peaceful. It had been sharp, cutting. Daisy carried the weight of a secret that was no longer a secret at all. It had become a sentence she still didn't know how to serve. She tried to straighten her posture against the ergonomic chair, but her shoulders refused to obey, curling forward beneath the invisible weight she couldn't seem to put down. Amy appeared in the doorway, just as she always did around 5 in the afternoon. The contrast between Amy's gentle presence and the storm raging inside Daisy was almost tangible, like a single wrong note in an otherwise perfect symphony. Amy wore the beige sweater Daisy loved so much, and her expression carried the same quiet calm that usually made everything feel easier. Today, it felt like an accusation. "You haven't even touched your water, Daisy. Was today really that bad?" Amy asked softly, her voice filled with concern that only made Daisy's guilt grow heavier. She stepped closer, reaching out to rest a hand on Daisy's shoulder, a gesture that had once felt like home. Now, it made Daisy flinch inside. She disguised the reaction with a dry cough. "It's just the quarterly close. You know how it is. So much pressure." Daisy couldn't bring herself to meet Amy's eyes. She stood, the office chair scraping loudly across the floor in the silence, and began organizing papers that were already perfectly arranged. "I need to finish this report tonight. You should go ahead without me." Amy stopped. Her hand remained suspended in the air for just a second before she slowly lowered it. Silence settled between them. The things left unsaid weighed more heavily than any conversation could have. "I can wait. We could grab something quick for dinner. You didn't eat lunch." "No, Amy, please." Daisy interrupted more sharply than she intended. She turned toward her, forcing a smile that never came close to reaching her eyes. "I just need some quiet. My head is, I understand," Amy answered, but she didn't sound like someone who understood. She sounded like someone quietly accepting that she was being pushed out of a place where she had once been welcome. She took one small step backward. Only a few inches separated them, yet the distance suddenly felt endless. "I'll see you at home then. Try not to spend the whole night here." The moment the door closed, Daisy collapsed. She didn't cry. She simply stopped. Her body relaxed all at once, as though every bone inside her had dissolved. The silence in the office became unbearable. She looked toward her desk, toward her own reflection in the dark computer screen. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Where had the woman gone who, only a few weeks earlier, believed in simple happiness, in peaceful evenings, in stable relationships, in a future that made sense? Everything had dissolved, slowly eroded by Charlotte's presence, a presence that somehow filled every corner of the office even when Charlotte herself wasn't there. A cold realization settled over Daisy. She was grieving, not for someone who had died, but for the version of herself that had existed before the CEO entered her life. She stood and walked toward the window, Outside, New York was beginning to glow beneath countless neon lights, a blurred painting of color that offered no comfort. She thought about Charlotte. Where would she be now? Probably somewhere control wasn't merely an option, but a condition of existence. Charlotte didn't suffer from uncertainty. She didn't owe explanations to anyone. A sharp stab of envy pierced Daisy's chest. It was immediately followed by a wave of nausea. She wanted to hate her. She wanted Charlotte to be nothing more than an arrogant executive, someone she could report to human resources, or simply ignore. But that wasn't the truth. What terrified Daisy most was knowing that if Charlotte walked through that office door at that exact moment and quietly asked her to leave with her, she probably wouldn't hesitate. That thought hurt more than anything else. It made her feel like a stranger inside her own life. Her phone vibrated on the desk. The sudden sound made her jump. She didn't want to look. It was probably Amy asking if she was okay, or another automated work email. Then she saw the notification. Charlotte. Only an address. One located in one of the city's quieter neighborhoods. And a time. Be there. This isn't a request. No signature. No explanation. Just an order. The color drained from Daisy's face. She should have deleted it. She should have blocked the number, walked out of the office, taken the first train home, pretended none of this had ever happened. Instead, she picked up her purse, checked herself in the mirror without thinking, smoothed her hair with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Obedience was no longer a professional obligation. It had become something instinctive, almost physical. She stepped into the elevator. Her stomach twisted tighter with every floor she descended. Outside, the city moved at its usual relentless pace, completely indifferent to the chaos inside her. The cold evening air struck her the moment she stepped out of the lobby. She barely noticed. She walked toward the parking garage, the sound of her heels echoing across the concrete. With every step, the certainty that she was making an irreversible mistake grew stronger. Yet beneath that fear, something unexpected emerged. Relief. The mask was finally slipping away. She no longer had to pretend everything was fine. She no longer had to convince herself she could return to the person she'd once been. The night was only beginning, and she knew, with an almost painful certainty, she would never return home the same woman. Fear remained constant, but hidden beneath it lived something far more dangerous, a forbidden curiosity, a desperate need to discover where this free fall would finally end. She got into her car. For a long time, she simply sat there, both hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine still off. Moonlight filtered through the windshield, illuminating tiny particles of dust dancing quietly in the air. She thought about Amy, about the comfort of their apartment, about the dinner that was probably growing cold on the table. The guilt burned like acid, yet the address glowing on her phone pulled at her with irresistible force. She started the engine. Its low rumble filled the silence of the night. She was driving toward the one place she should never go, doing the very thing she knew would destroy whatever remained of her ordinary life. But for the first time in a very long time, life felt real, terrifyingly, painfully, completely real. And she knew, from this moment forward, the word back would no longer exist in her vocabulary. The door gave way with a sharp click, the sound almost startling in the absolute silence of the floor. The apartment was a minimalist loft, its floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the scattered glow of New York below, a sea of lights that now felt distant, almost irrelevant. Daisy stepped inside slowly. The air carried the scent of rain, mixed with a faint trace of bitter coffee, an aroma that made her stop halfway down the hallway. She could feel every beat of her heart echoing against her ribs, uneven and almost painful. Charlotte stood by the window with her back to her. She was no longer wearing her tailored blazer, only a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her hands resting on the metal frame of the window. She looked smaller somehow, less untouchable. Yet the tension between them was so thick, Daisy felt as though she could touch it with her fingertips. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Charlotte's voice finally broke the silence. It was quiet. Gone was the familiar tone of authority. She didn't turn around. There was a vulnerability in her voice that Daisy had never imagined she would hear. "I almost didn't." Daisy's answer escaped as little more than a whisper. She took a cautious step forward, and the wooden floor creaked softly beneath her feet. "I tried to think of every excuse imaginable. I tried to think about Amy, about the life I was building. I tried to think about everything I would lose." Only then did Charlotte turn. The city lights reflected softly across her face, casting delicate shadows beneath her eyes. There was exhaustion there, a quiet humanity Daisy had never been allowed to see before. Charlotte took one slow step toward her, not like a CEO walking into a board meeting, like someone searching for the only place that still felt safe. "And what did you find?" Charlotte asked. The question lingered between them, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with work. "When you thought about your life, what was missing?" Daisy felt her throat tighten. Her eyes drifted to Charlotte's hands, loosely clenched at her sides. A clear sign that Charlotte was fighting her own battle just as fiercely. The honesty Daisy had spent so long trying to bury rose uncontrollably to the surface. The rest of it, she barely whispered the words. The part I'd been pretending didn't exist. She stepped closer, shrinking the distance until she could feel the warmth radiating from Charlotte. "I don't know how you do this to me. I don't know how you get inside my head and unravel everything I've worked so hard to put back together." Charlotte let out a quiet laugh. It carried no amusement, but neither did it hold its usual hardness. She moved closer until only inches separated them. Daisy's breathing became shallow. Charlotte slowly lifted her hand. She hesitated for the briefest moment, then gently brushed Daisy's cheek. The touch was warm, a striking contrast to the cold Daisy had carried with her before walking through that door. There was no urgency, no display of power, only a silent request for peace. "I never wanted to turn your life upside down, Daisy." Charlotte paused, searching for words that had once come so easily. I couldn't ignore what happened every time you walked into my office. Every time I watched you trying to become someone you aren't, just to make the rest of the world comfortable." Daisy closed her eyes as Charlotte's thumb slowly traced the curve of her jaw. She was tired, so impossibly tired of fighting. The exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks slowly dissolved, replaced by a calm so profound it almost frightened her. "What are we, Charlotte?" Daisy asked softly, her eyes still closed. "What is all of this? Maybe we don't need a name for it." Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper, so close Daisy could feel her warm breath against her skin. "Maybe what we need is a beginning without office walls, without the labels of boss and employee. Just us." Charlotte's hand drifted gently to Daisy's neck, her fingertips grazing her skin with almost reverent tenderness. Daisy opened her eyes. She found Charlotte already looking back at her. The barrier of professionalism was gone. The endless game of carefully constructed reflections had disappeared. All that remained was surrender, mutual vulnerability, something they had both avoided for far too long. Daisy felt her knees weaken, this time, not from fear, from relief. "And Amy?" The question escaped almost automatically, shaped by guilt. Charlotte sighed. Her hand settled gently against the back of Daisy's neck. The gesture carried quiet possessiveness, yet overwhelming tenderness. "You already know the answer. You're here, and I stopped pretending I didn't care a long time ago. If you choose to stay, it won't be for me. It will be for us. And I will never force you to choose. But I can't keep pretending you're not what I've been searching for all this time." The raw honesty of those words crashed into Daisy like a rising tide. Charlotte wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't trying to control her. She was simply offering herself. Charlotte's fingers slid gently into Daisy's hair, tilting her head ever so slightly. The closeness between them felt magnetic. The tension that had once been fueled by anxiety transformed into anticipation Daisy could barely contain. "Are you asking me to risk everything?" Her voice was almost inaudible. Charlotte shook her head gently. "I'm asking you to be honest. With me. With yourself. Life is far too short to live only half of it, Daisy." Tears filled Daisy's eyes, not from sadness, but from the release of something she'd been carrying for far too long. She closed the final distance between them. Her hands rested softly against Charlotte's waist, feeling the crisp fabric of her shirt and the steady warmth beneath it. The silence inside the loft became magnetic. Charlotte leaned forward until their foreheads rested gently together, a moment of pure closeness, free from demands, free from expectations. "I'm so tired of running," Daisy confessed, their breaths mingling between them. "Then stop," Charlotte whispered. "Just stop." They remained there, perfectly still, quietly absorbing each other's presence. They didn't need dramatic promises. They didn't need immediate answers. Simply standing there together, far away from everything that had once defined them, already felt like the beginning of something new. The air inside the loft suddenly felt lighter, as though the burden of every impossible decision had been suspended, if only for a moment. Daisy realized then that happiness wasn't something she had to conquer or build through sheer effort. It was something she simply had to allow herself to receive. And for the very first time, she was willing to let it happen. The fear was still there, quiet, lingering somewhere beneath the surface. But the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be had grown infinitely stronger. The night seemed to promise a different tomorrow, a future where perhaps there would be no more secrets between them. And as silence gently settled around them, Daisy understood that no matter what happened next, she would never turn back. They had already walked through the fire, and now, standing among the ashes, they could finally see a real path forward. The morning light poured through the expansive office windows with a different kind of clarity that day. It was softer, less unforgiving, almost as though the entire building had been washed clean by the storm of the previous night. Daisy walked down the hallway at an unhurried pace. For the first time in months, she no longer felt the need to pretend she was rushing somewhere important. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, the movement completely free of the constant tension that had lived inside her muscles for so long. The floor was still quiet in the early morning hours. Only the gentle hum of the climate control system and the distant murmur of New York beyond the reinforced windows filled the silence. She stopped outside her office door, but before stepping inside, her eyes instinctively drifted farther down the corridor, toward another office, toward the brushed metal plaque bearing Charlotte's name. There was no sharp ache in her chest anymore, no instinct to run, only a quiet certainty she was still learning how to understand, as though she had finally awakened from a long, restless dream into a reality that was, surprisingly, much simpler than she'd feared. Charlotte stood beside the coffee station, a place she was almost never seen. She looked strangely out of place there, as though she had wandered into someone else's routine. She wasn't wearing the dark blazer that had always served as her armor. Her white shirt was slightly rumpled, a tiny detail anyone else would have overlooked. But to Daisy, it told the story of a night that hadn't truly ended when the sun came up. Charlotte noticed her. She didn't turn immediately, almost as if she wanted to give Daisy the space to absorb what she was seeing. When she finally faced her, the familiar mask of absolute control was gone. So was the penetrating gaze that used to strip Daisy bare. Instead, there was something softer, a quiet light that hovered somewhere between exhaustion and peace, the kind of exhaustion that comes after finally putting down a burden you've carried for years. She said nothing. She simply watched Daisy walk toward her, every step calm, measured, as though the sunrise itself had slowed her heartbeat. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Daisy asked quietly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. It sounded natural, free of every layer of corporate formality that had once stood between them. She stopped a comfortable distance away. Only days earlier, that same space would have crackled with unbearable tension. Now, it was simply the space between two people learning how to exist outside the roles life had assigned them. Charlotte smiled, just barely. The tiny curve at the corner of her mouth somehow made her look years younger, almost approachable. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, quietly borrowing its warmth before taking one slow step toward Daisy. This closeness no longer carried fear, only relief, as though every misplaced piece was finally finding where it belonged, even if neither of them yet knew what to call the picture they were building together. "I slept very little." Charlotte's voice was husky. Gone was the polished authority that had once filled every boardroom. "I think the silence outside was simply too loud for my mind to rest." She hesitated. Her eyes briefly dropped toward the floor before lifting again to meet Daisy's. "And you? Did you make it home?" The question carried far more than its literal meaning. It wasn't about the drive. It was about the choice. About returning to the life Daisy had believed, only 24 hours earlier, was the only future she could possibly have. Daisy nodded slowly. The weight of the question settled inside her, not painfully this time, but peacefully, as confirmation. "I made it exactly where I needed to be." The smile that appeared on Charlotte's face wasn't the victorious smile of a CEO closing another impossible deal. It was the smile of a woman who had finally found something she hadn't even realized she'd been searching for. The atmosphere between them wasn't euphoric. There were no grand promises, no declarations that everything would suddenly become easy. There was only peace, a quiet understanding that from this moment forward, their lives would no longer be governed by fear, not by the fear of being discovered, nor by the crushing expectations of everyone around them. There was a raw honesty in that moment no language could fully describe. They were simply two imperfect women, two lives intertwined through mistakes, through hesitation, finally standing in the same place, no longer running. They remained silent for a long time, but unlike every silence that had come before, this one wasn't tense. It wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with possibility. Outside, New York slowly came to life. Traffic grew louder. People hurried toward another ordinary workday, completely unaware of the small universe quietly unfolding inside that bright, ordinary hallway. Charlotte slowly reached out her hand, not to claim, not to demand, simply to offer. Her fingertips brushed lightly against the sleeve of Daisy's coat, a touch so brief it barely lasted a heartbeat. Yet warmth spread through Daisy's arm almost instantly, a quiet reminder that what had happened between them hadn't been a detour. It had been a change in direction. There were no guarantees, no roadmap for how Monday would work, no guidebook for navigating the company or the rest of the world. But somehow, the how no longer mattered nearly as much as the simple fact that they were standing there together. After a quiet moment, Charlotte stepped back. She turned and walked toward her office. At the doorway, she stopped, then glanced over her shoulder, almost as though she needed to make sure Daisy was still there, still real, not simply another dream brought on by exhaustion. She didn't ask Daisy to come inside. She didn't schedule a meeting. She didn't give an order. She simply waited. Daisy remained where she was for a moment, looking at the woman who had turned her life completely upside down and somehow had finally set it right. She thought about Amy, about the life she'd left behind, about the difficult conversations still waiting for her. The guilt was still there, but it no longer suffocated her. She took one quiet step forward, following Charlotte to the threshold of the office, where the morning sunlight poured across the polished floor. Maybe nothing ahead would be easy. Maybe there would be more obstacles than either of them could imagine. But as Daisy crossed that doorway, she realized something. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't merely surviving. She was finally living. And somehow, that alone was enough. Enough to begin again. Who could possibly know what tomorrow would bring when the sun finally set once more? Perhaps no one. But for the very first time, that question no longer filled her with fear. It filled her with hope. Quiet, steady, and real. The silence of a Sunday morning in Brooklyn was nothing like the silence of the office. The silence at work had always been heavy with deadlines, expectations, and glances that measured every movement. The silence filling the loft, with soft autumn light filtering through the trees outside, was something entirely different. It was a silence you could breathe. Daisy sat at the end of the linen sofa, quietly watching Charlotte in the kitchen. There was no tailored suit, no CEO's armor, none of the flawless, untouchable composure that had kept Daisy suspended between fear and desire for months. Charlotte wore a lightweight cotton shirt, the sleeves carelessly rolled above her elbows, completely absorbed in something as ordinary as making coffee. The image felt so disconnected from the Charlotte Daisy had first met that she still occasionally caught herself holding her breath, half expecting the phone to ring and break the spell. "You're staring again." Charlotte spoke without turning around. Her voice carried an easy warmth Daisy had learned to recognize as the sound of someone who was finally home. "I'm not staring. I'm just watching the light." A smile slipped across Daisy's lips. She knew she was lying. Charlotte knew it too. But this lie carried none of the sharpness it once had. It was playful now, a quiet tenderness they had earned one day at a time. Charlotte turned, carrying 2 ceramic mugs. She crossed the wooden floor barefoot, her footsteps soft against the hardwood, and sat beside Daisy. At first, she intentionally left a little space between them. Then, almost without thinking, she leaned closer. The warmth radiating from Daisy's mug became a gentle reminder that time was moving forward. Charlotte rested her elbows on her knees, looking out at the same skyline Daisy had been watching. Neither of them felt any urgency to speak. Daisy realized that this was perhaps their greatest victory, the ability to occupy the same room, the same silence, without feeling the need to fill every empty space with words or explanations. "You know," Daisy began, laughing softly, "yesterday at the grocery store, The cashier asked if we were sisters. I almost dropped the bottle of olive oil. Charlotte laughed, a genuine laugh. Months earlier, it would have sounded impossible inside a boardroom. She tilted her head, studying Daisy's profile with a tenderness that still managed to turn Daisy's stomach upside down. And you didn't correct her. I didn't. I completely froze. The woman behind us in line started pointing out all these similarities. Something about the way we both look at fruit. It was so strange. It was. Charlotte's voice dropped into a softer register, more intimate. She reached out almost absent-mindedly and brushed Daisy's bangs away from her eyes, tucking a stubborn strand behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, a quiet reminder that this closeness was no longer forbidden, no longer something hidden. It was simply life. Maybe she noticed something, Charlotte said quietly, that we're still trying to understand ourselves. Daisy closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to absorb the touch. The fear that all of this might somehow be a mistake, some terrible transgression that would eventually demand a painful price, had quietly disappeared. What remained was only one question. What if life had always been meant to feel like this, without all the fences they'd built around themselves? The answer came every morning they woke up in the same bed, under the same light, knowing they no longer had anywhere they needed to run. There was no urgency to hide, no desperate need to prove they could be normal. Normal had quietly given way to something far more important, something real. And however messy reality could sometimes be, it was infinitely more sustainable than pretending. Do you regret it? The question slipped out almost unintentionally. Daisy opened her eyes and found Charlotte already looking at her. The familiar intensity remained, but judgment had disappeared. Charlotte let out a slow breath. It seemed to carry years of tension away with it. She leaned a little closer. The scent of sandalwood blended naturally with the aroma of fresh coffee filling the loft. When I look back at my old office, it feels like I'm looking at someone else's life. A life built on control, on goals, on silences I once mistook for strength, when really, they were only loneliness. She smiled faintly. Regret means wishing things had happened differently. I don't. I accept it. I accept that I needed to become the woman I was, so I could become the woman I am now. With you. Tears stung Daisy's eyes. Not from sadness, from recognition. She rested her head against Charlotte's shoulder, feeling the soft texture of her cotton shirt against her cheek. Charlotte covered Daisy's hand with her own, their fingers intertwined naturally, almost automatically. A connection made of skin, heartbeats, breath. They had already walked through the fire, and on that peaceful Sunday morning, there was finally nothing left to prove. I don't think we'll ever become what people expect us to be, Daisy murmured, closing her eyes once more. Charlotte smiled against her hair. And why would we want to? Other people's expectations are exactly that. Theirs. What we have is the only thing that's truly real. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Its steady rhythm seemed to underline the peace surrounding them. Outside, the weather shifted. Clouds drifted apart, allowing warm sunlight to pour into the loft, painting everything in soft golden tones. Daisy felt the reassuring warmth of Charlotte beside her, a steady anchor in a world that continued spinning outside those windows. She didn't need dramatic declarations. She didn't need promises that forever would be easy. She only needed this moment, this silence, this coffee, this hand holding hers. She remembered every time she'd wanted to run, every moment she'd convinced herself that love simply wasn't worth the risk. How wrong she'd been. The real risk wasn't loving someone. The real risk was spending an entire lifetime watching life happen from a distance, too afraid to truly participate in it. Charlotte hadn't entered her life to destroy it, as Daisy had once feared. She had entered it to show her that life, when lived honestly, was infinitely larger than any carefully drawn plan could ever be. Charlotte stood and gently pulled Daisy to her feet. Together they walked toward the window, watching the quiet movement of the streets below. There was no rush to return to work, no pressure to pretend. Charlotte wrapped one arm around Daisy's waist and rested her chin lightly on her shoulder. Their reflection shimmered softly in the glass. Months earlier, it would have looked impossible. Yet there they were, not perfect, not untouched by old wounds, not entirely free from memories that occasionally still found them, but present, completely present. "What do you want to do today?" Charlotte asked softly. There was genuine curiosity in her voice. Daisy looked down at their hands, still intertwined. She thought about the week ahead, about the office, about every complicated conversation still waiting for them, and then she smiled. At that moment, the entire world had become nothing more than the loft, the light, and the woman standing beside her. "Nothing," Daisy answered softly. "I want to do absolutely nothing." Charlotte smiled too. For the first time, she seemed to have no plans at all. She simply tightened the embrace, a quiet, deeply human gesture, completely free of corporate authority or power. They remained there together, silent, watching the world continue outside. Two people who had somehow found, amid the chaos of New York, a small piece of solid ground where they could finally rest. And perhaps, in the end, the greatest love story was never about fairy tale endings. Perhaps it had always been about finding the courage to remain vulnerable every single day, about choosing the same person, especially when silence grows loud, and life asks you to be strong. Neither of them knew what the next Monday would bring, but in that moment, as the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the living room floor, they already had everything they truly needed. The rest, they would figure out together, one step at a time, or perhaps simply by sitting quietly, watching the light slowly change, knowing that after so much running, they had finally stopped. They had found each other, and in the quiet of that Sunday afternoon, that was enough. Who can truly say what happens after the final page? Perhaps real life begins exactly where stories decide to end.